Been a tough year being a property investor? Rising interest rates got you second guessing? Not sure who to turn to for help? You need to reach out to Australian Property Scout, one of Smart Property Investment's most trusted buyers agency. Director Sam Gordon has personally helped many SPI show listeners invest to reach their financial goals using his purpose-built strategies. So what are you waiting for? Head to www.australianpropertyscout.com.au and book in a call with us today.
This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
G'day, how you going? Phil Tarrant, host of the Smart Property Investment Show. Hope you're well. Arrived back from Canberra yesterday after a couple of days, treading the halls of Parliament House, and I was fortunate to be down there and get an invitation into the sort of special section for watching Question Time. And I took a colleague of mine along there who I work with who is not Australian by birth, and got him to sort of experience all that is great around Australian democracy in the House of Representatives. Good fun, good times, quite a lot of debate happening. Housing affordability is one of them, so it was good to hear how the government and the opposition are tackling that very challenging aspect for Australia. We are all familiar with the rental crisis facing renters at the moment. It's good news for investors in many ways because the rents are going up, which can help allay some of the cost of holding property by way of mortgage repayments, but that doesn't discount some of the social impact of lack of housing for Australians. So something that needs to be addressed and will continue to be, I think, a headline topic of conversation in 2023 within the bureaucratic engine that governs the nation. And we'll keep reporting on it. I think it's got to get sorted out because there are so many issues connected with it. One is supply chain constraints as a result of global factors, the COVID zero policy, the war in Ukraine, all that sort of stuff is still impacting the cost of materials and getting stuff to Australia. We also have labour shortages, which is a big issue. We're not getting enough approvals getting through. That's a big issue. We have our governments, particularly the local governments, being a handbrake on development. That's a big issue. So there's a lot of reasons why we don't have enough housing in Australia. And you throw into the mix the fact that migration is just kicking off subsequent to COVID, and I think we're going to have a much bigger issue. So that's an issue for all Australians. And we'll cover it here on the Smart Property Investment Show. I think for you as a property investor, my philosophy of all this, and this is a show for property investors, charge your rents at market rent. Don't gouge your tenants. Market is market, and the market is a fair price. So that's how I've tended to shape my view of it all. Maybe I can get a different view on that. The person in the studio is back on the show by popular demand. He hasn't been on here for a little while. He's been busy doing many other things, and I'm sure we'll hear about it. But he's also quite comfortable down in Canberra, knocking on doors and chatting with people. He's spent quite a lot of time down there once upon a time running up to a particular budget. No doubt he'll tell us all about it again. Brad Beer, Managing Director, BMT Tax Depreciation. Brad, how you going?
I feel great. Yes, I had some fun in Canberra. I remember going to watch Question Time, but some interesting times there. Look, it's been very interesting watching the rental affordability debate and both sides of that, and it's playing out pretty heavily in the media lately. And, I'm a keen property investor myself, but I do think we've got some issues. We need to not have people sleeping on the streets.
Great.
And we need people to be able to afford rental accommodation. And unfortunately, the government intervention in that doesn't seem to be fixing some of the issues. And, they can't always fix issues straight away, but we need to get a balance in how do we provide housing for people. And I think, investors providing rental accommodation has in many ways worked quite well for a long time. One of the issues, I think, is trying to mess with it too much because people get scared. We try to bring in things like, okay, Queensland, let's aggregate your land tax and charge you more money.
Don't worry, we shut that down.
That got shut down. But I think it creates a bit more fear. We're buying residential properties for some wealth creation.
Yeah.
We need to reasonably try to do that. And fear around, well, if they keep changing the laws and it doesn't work, it's like there's fear around whether to do that. And less investment in that means less housing available because it does, at the end of the day, create some available housing. And I don't think, most property investors in this country are, own one property. It's not all a bunch of moguls making millions of dollars. So if you make it hard, less of them will buy it.
Yeah, and there's a couple of moving parts. It's an interesting debate and an interesting discussion. The issue, and again, this is a podcast for property investors. If this was a podcast for a different community, you'd probably be having a very different conversation, but we're here to represent and promote and support property investors. And property investors have made a decision to largely think of the future and think about how they can spend a comfortable retirement without having to lean on the government to provide them with the finances to do that. And property investment is a great vehicle for doing that. And the government understands that as well. They want people to create wealth independent of what the government should be providing them or can provide them at a point of pension. That's an important point. The issue is that property investors are often demonised as part of this process of the issue behind the house affordability crisis. So property investors are looked as being nasty because they're pushing up rents. It was a big issue with that, and one of the reasons why there's not enough properties around there. That's not property investors' decision. That's supply, and that needs to be led by government, federal, state, and local, and that's where the issue is. So my position is charge market rent. There's nothing wrong with that.
Look, my position likewise. Charge market rent. One thing that I think gets a little forgotten on the non-property investor side of this debate is that doing that, we all have to borrow large sums of money and take risk. Risk is something that some people don't sleep very well with, like big debts. There's a risk. And at the end of the day, you buy the property, you own the property, it needs to be reasonable. Interest rates have gone up. There's not a lot of talk about how hard it is for investors to still make their payments. And I've seen some sixes in front of the percentages recently. And look, there's ways to look at covering that risk as a property investor and make sure you can handle times when it's harder. And, increasing rentals at reasonable rates help to pay for that and help to deal with that. But on the other side of that, if it's more expensive to be housed, whether you live in it or rent it, then that's the case. That becomes, both of them become a supply issue. Whether you're an owner-occupier, prices have gone ridiculous. They may have softened a little bit, but the affordability overall is hard. So the affordability of renting or buying when the interest rates are what they are now as opposed to what they were, was it only 6 months ago?
Only 6 months ago.
Started raising it every single month.
Back when everyone started with a 2 or a 1, right?
Yes. So it's hard either way, and rental or otherwise, the cost of living in accommodation has increased. How do we do that? One of the ways to deal with that is to provide more supply so the market doesn't go so ridiculous in pricing and keeps reasonable growth levels. And we tend to, over time, fix that in our country. Like if you look, we have some up, some down, but we do end up building it. We just take too long.
Yeah.
And then we get gluts of property. And, we're just not managing the process because it takes time and you've got to lend money to do it as developers. And so we don't provide the stock quick enough and then we provide too much of it. And it seems to be a cycle that goes round and round.
And this is the nature of the beast. And as a property investor, it's about being smart around that cycle. The opportunity for property investors in this market is just to be quite fluid. One of the good things about investing in property in Australia, and I think I'm probably going to butcher this number, but it's something like 91% of all rental properties in Australia are owned by private investors. Somewhere around that. The government sort of ponies up the rest of it, plus some large corporate. And this whole sort of build to rent thing is gaining popularity in Australia. And this is when the big building companies build a property block and rent it all out. But property investors largely have the lion's share. I'm going to call it the lion's share. Maybe I got the percentage wrong. The lion's share of rental properties in Australia. So the Australian government is highly invested in supporting property investors, and they do it by way of tax incentives. Negative gearing, all this sort of stuff, which potential government was thinking of taking away. So the government has skin in the game. The banks have skin in the game. They want investors to be successful. Other ways in which, and we'll have a small chat about it today, that property investors used to get more benefits, but less now because of what happened in Canberra is around depreciation, right? Yeah. That's another often forgotten component of property investing, and you must see people get it wrong all the time, Brad.
I would say, and when we did the
one
research a little, well... Phil, guilty. I think still based on, some stats, we did some work in the past and it was about 80. I'd say it's better now. Let's say 70% of investors would be my call on the number that don't maximise the deductions properly for whatever
70%.
reason. So it doesn't mean they're claiming nothing. It just means that, if properly done and made sure that we've gone through, inspected it, got everything we can get, and not just listened to, it was old, my accountant thinks I don't need it, my mate at the pub, whatever, or I was just slack and didn't get it done, Phil. So
guilty.
Yeah, if there's so many of them leaving some money on the table Why? I don't know. They don't want to spend $700 to find it out. They listen to advice that's not particularly correct. But it does mean that the cost of owning that property becomes higher. Now, if we look back to changes and what's happened there, it's definitely subtracted some of the deductions out of second-hand property, which stops transactions. And the idea is that it stayed the same, I guess, on new property because it helps, might, I guess, sway people to new property / more supply, which has got an argument. The way they've changed it has really made it not quite right, because if I buy a 1-year-old stove, why is that worth nothing for depreciation? My 1-year-old car's still worth something if I buy it for business, but my 1-year-old stove isn't, which is just not the right way to do that. But it's an example of trying to mess with it with tax deductions that have been provided to property investors to help invest in property, to provide it. We took away negative gearing in 1985. It lasted less than 2 years because people slept on the streets. There's a public housing waiting list that went ridiculous. Have they got it right now? I don't know. But such a large percentage of the property, as you say, is provided by private landlords in this space, and the yields are low. Yields are low on property. Yeah. So therefore, we're banking on a bit of growth as property investors to try to save for retirement, etc. And trying to fix that when it doesn't have the returns is going to be difficult. The concept of build to rent, I know there's a lot more of that, as you said, coming around at the moment. But one of the big problems for them is there's a lack of rental return. So how do we make that work? We either give government incentives so that it happens, or we convince the super money that comes from us to invest back into property via someone else with a margin, effectively. Or maybe it's not as badly broken in some ways as we try to blame it on. One of the problems with individual investors is that we have a small few that maybe don't fix things and treat tenants badly. And
they're demonised as well, right?
They make everybody demonised, I think, is one of the issues. The same as one bad tenant makes everybody demonised the other way. And you'll read both sides of that. Making sure we've got fair and equitable laws in relation to tenancies so that we can have some level of security of tenure, while also realising that a landlord takes risk and has a debt in order to have that property and needs to have some level of ability to control that asset. And that's the challenges, I guess, for these guys to face. Depreciation, yes, be nice to consider they might look at the way it should be done, which we'll bang away and hope to achieve sometime. It's only been 5 years, Phil.
When was the date when they changed the depreciation?
It was in the budget in May 2017. So it is.
You remember that date, right?
Yeah, 7 p.m, 9th of May 2017. Choking on my staying at Parliament House when they announced a change that we had no idea about. Shows given that I do about half of the depreciation schedules in the country, it shows you there was a good amount of consultation about that when we do most of them, or half or so of them, and they didn't talk to us about it. Let's think about changing this. They do that now a little bit more. They ask me some questions before they think about changes in that way. But it is something that made a pretty big impact on our business, especially because some of the properties you could do before, you can't do anymore. I guess the important things for investors are there's still deductions there. There's still deductions on second-hand properties. There's some properties now that may have got some deductions in the past that won't get deductions now, but we tell people that before we go ahead and do anything. So it's very easy to identify what deductions might be there on any type of property. Look, new property definitely gets more. It always did. There's now a slightly bigger difference between new and second-hand property, but depreciation's there. A lot of people aren't taking advantage of it properly. Phil used to, not in the past. And we help them to get it.
Yeah. It's I've just tried to Google the stats on what percentage of residential rental properties are owned by private investors. Nothing popped up, but it's a sage reminder, Brad, here around just how many property investors there are according to 2019, 2020 stats. And I think these are the most recent ones they got. 1 in 5 Australian households, that's over 2 million people, own property besides the one they're residing in.
Yeah, I think that's about the number. What I expected is about 2 million.
And that's investment properties or holiday homes, right? Of these, 67.5% own one property beside their principal place of residence, 24% own 2 properties, 7.7% own 3 properties, and 4.3% or 87,000 own 4 or more properties. So there's a lot of investors out there. And again, going back to investors being demonised,
it's a lot of the population.
It's a big part of the population.
And I think that stat,
big part of the adult population.
A very big part of the adult population. I think that stat on one property is actually higher. I don't know, that stat's coming from somewhere you've Googled, but I think multiple owners of one property might be messing that up or something. But In our stats, they were higher. In most stats you see, it shows more like 70 to 80%, depending on whose numbers you look at. So there is, like we said before, it's not a bunch of moguls that own all the property. There's a few of those around, of course.
Yeah.
But there's predominantly the amount of housing that is provided by property investors is mum and dad investors making not ridiculous amounts of money trying to put something aside for retirement through some growth over time, because they're not getting it through yield. The yields, although they're increasing at the moment, which is good for property investors, the yield play on property investment doesn't work.
You don't typically invest in property because you want a huge yield, right? You're not parking your money there to get a big return on it over, immediately. It's a long-term capital growth play largely that you might get some good yielding properties which can offset holding costs on a wider, larger portfolio. But I invest in property for capital gain, and I just want to minimise my costs as much as possible through there.
Exactly the same here, Phil.
Yeah.
The real thing is capital gain and really controlling finance.
Yeah.
With that
It's the
capital,
big thing.
With that capital gain, how do I control the money and be able to use that money and leverage into more property that doesn't give me that covers the cost of that money, or as best you can, or above, because it doesn't. The yields just generally aren't there. There's not a yield play, which is, I guess, some of the issue with build to rent. There's not enough yield.
There's not enough, yeah. And you think about large corporations want to get the biggest return on money possible. And I think back to someone like GE, who set up a mortgage financing company in Australia. They pulled out of the market after about 2 or 3 years because they weren't getting a return on capital. They just went, I can't remember what the number was, like 20%, 25%. And they went, not enough, we're leaving. So large corporations will deploy their capital in places which are going to give them the big returns. So this whole, build to rent, that's, these large corporations might work in parts of Europe and Scandinavia where it's really big, but I don't know if the numbers work yet for corporates here in Australia.
Multifamily works well in the US. They do it in large numbers. I guess the rental yields are obviously enough to show, because they need to manage that, show enough of a yield and margin to deploy the capital.
Yeah.
And the capital, there's not enough margin on the capital. And in Australia, where I guess the positive of build to rent is that they're definitely investors for the long term, and it gives more tenure. And that's the thing that I guess the private property investor market needs to address somewhat.
Yeah, absolutely. So if a build to rent, you could move into a brand new rental property and probably stay there forever, which is good. And some of the challenges that renters have, they have to move every sort of year or 2 years and are getting punted. You know what's really funny? I'm sort of connected with it. Up on sort of coastal parts of the Central Coast, you can only really get about a 10-month rental, or they factor it into rental agreements. So for the summer, they want you to move out. You can move back in at the end of summer, and during the summer period is when they just Airbnb and put it out there. That's another huge crisis as well, right?
Which is a real problem. Like, I know over time I've looked at properties I've owned in areas and gone, well, I'd like leases to end in the right time of the year to be able to relet it,
Yeah.
where possible. So I tried over time to make sure, like, I've got, some properties around the Newcastle area, for example, and there's a uni there, and I always like my leases to end around, January, February, when there's pressure on the market, right? There's nothing wrong with trying to do that. I'm not, but it just means the lease ends. There's pressure on the market. If the tenant does want to go at the end of that lease, then I've got the best opportunity to re-rent that at the market rent at the time.
That's okay.
And that's okay. But yeah, the 10-month rental, that's a bit rough.
Yeah.
I guess when you start, but in crisis like now, I guess people are pushed into rentals that maybe are not there. They don't have the choices of taking something because there's just nothing available.
Well, these housing crisis stuff, and we're not going to solve this today, but a lot of it happens in these lifestyle locations. Like the same thing happens in places like Byron Bay, where they go, you can rent this place from February to the end of November, but come December, January, You're out because I can probably get 10 times more each week letting it out to holiday punters. So,
and that is, in the world of policymakers, that is a real problem, isn't it?
It is. How do you police that? It's going to get really hard, but anyway, it's a tough one. But I want to know what you think about the property market. We'll get into that. Let's go to a quick break. Stay with us, everyone. Back in a moment. Welcome back. Phil Tarrant, host of the Smart Property Investment Show. I'm with Brad Beer from BMT. It's BMT Tax Depreciation. Is that the proper name?
That's the proper name. Well done.
What does BMT stand for?
Well, interestingly enough, nothing that's relevant anymore. That was the original three guys that started this business called Brendan, Matt and Tom.
Oh, there you go.
So I actually started working for them 12 months later as the first employee.
Wow.
So the B's not even me.
Okay. See, I always thought the B might have been you.
No, well, I could not correct you, but Brendan, Matt and Tom, the guys that went through uni, they're a couple of years older than me. They all formed BMT after starting in other jobs as quantity surveyors and project managers, whatever. And they're no longer in the business from about 8 years ago now. Matt was bought out, I don't know, just after I started in 1998, but the other two were my partners up until around 8 years ago. So they've moved on. So there's none of the original BMT.
Well, they've got the original guys there.
Yeah, the original. Yeah, I was the first staff member.
Genuine. the OG. And you guys are the biggest in Australia, right, when it comes to this sort of stuff?
Yeah, look, Phil, we have done about 850,000 depreciation schedules.
When are you going to do 1 million? When's going to be the millionth?
That I would hope should happen in the next 8. We're doing 45,000 a year. We've done 850. It might be a bit more than that now. Yeah. It might be 860.
Are you going to celebrate it? Are you going to do something?
Yeah, I think we should settle.
I reckon you should definitely do something.
Like we always have the competition in the offices that who does the 800,000th job, and they'll get a little thing. So there should be a big prize for the millionth job, and then we should.
It should be balloons from the roof and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, and we should celebrate ourselves the millionth job.
You should. I think. Millionth job.
So look, I've about 180 staff in our organisation spread all over the country doing depreciation schedules. It's all we do. Yeah. Residential and commercial, and a big percentage of it is residential stuff. So I think we've done more depreciation schedules than anybody.
I imagine you have. But I guess, though, it gives you and your team a particular lens through which to view property in Australia that not a lot of people would see it from that way, particularly from a maybe cost of building point of view right now. And property's getting a lot more expensive, right, to stick together because it's getting more expensive. But what's your sort of take on the market? Everyone's there's a lot of doomsday, doom and gloom type merchants around right now, and these are the sort of armchair, duck in, duck out of property and don't really they have a long affinity with it. Yes, it's a softening market, and we sort of speak about it at length on this particular podcast. But what's your attitude to property at the moment, Brad?
Look, the doomsday's been there. I mean, I've only been in this industry for 24 years. It's a little while.
It's a little while, long enough.
In saying that, some of the worst crisis, I suppose, we've seen in property values are actually before my time. We haven't seen, the early 90s again, really. And I was, still at school then. But after all my time reading so much 40%, there'll be 40% drops, there'll be 50% drops. And even if I look at the current market now, we're dropped by 3, 4, 5%, some places 10%, whatever it is. But it's been on the back of substantial growth. Yeah. And if you look at the last sort of short period of time as we keep putting interest rates up and people are worried about values, people can't borrow as much because the interest rates have gone up and they need to be assessed. So they can't pay as much. And they've dropped a bit. But they've not dropped anywhere near as much as they've grown. If you look at the last 3 to 5 years, let's take away the start of COVID where it all went a bit funny in many ways. But look at the average growth in properties in the last period of time. And as a property investor, I'd be very happy with that average growth over the last 5 years. Yeah. And I should be. And do I think it could decline further in areas? Absolutely. It could get tough. I never see as much as I've read in the media about how much it could go down from the expert in the armchair or wherever from somewhere overseas that needs a headline. I don't think in my time of 24 years I've seen it drop as far as the media said it could in that period of time. And I'll have the same view now. I think, am I ramping up? As a property investor, I think, and we see this with the clients, when the yields are increasing as they are, and the prices are decreasing a bit, that's the time to get back into the market. You shouldn't be following the herd and when it's going ballistic. You should be trying to work out when it's dropped enough to come back in. Yeah, I'm doing some other things at the moment, so I haven't been looking. I've been busy and doing whatever, but the times to buy, like let's look at the start of the pandemic. It was all sort of no one's buying. The number of loans in that time dropped to sort of 10,000 a month as opposed to 20,000 a month in the last 12 months ago to 16,000 a month at the moment, new loans to investors. So that was the time, if I listen to my own rhetoric here, that we should have been looking around, being finance ready, being able and buy as an investor, because then you're sort of picking up the bargains at the time you can. And is that time ready now, or is there a bit more hurt in there? Well, the interest rates I don't think are going south very soon, so maybe there's a little bit more time before you need to try and swoop in. But generally, We see the savvy investors are actually looking to swoop in when the market's tough, not when the market's flying. And that's what we should be doing, or should be trying to consider. Being long-term investments, if you're never going to pick the exact bottom of the particular market at a certain place, you've got to do it as best you can and realise that this is a long-term investment. It drops down a little bit further, okay. History shows in Australia that generally it recovers beyond where it dropped at some point. And if the yields on the way are okay, in 10 years, in 20 years, in the time that we should be considering investing in, long-term investors are better for tenure.
Yeah.
No one, should the rules be different around the flip? I mean, you get 100% CGT. Well, you get CGT on the whole lot if you flip within a year. Maybe that needs to be made harsher. So that's a way for the private investor to not be just in there to flip to make a quick profit, which, people are doing what they're doing. That's okay. But it's not providing housing, which is what the private market needs to consider.
And that goes back to the point we were making earlier. You must see it, Brad, and one of the biggest issues, I think, and no one's really talking about it yet for property investors. I think a lot of property investors are underinsured. The cost to replace, say you got a house and it burns down and you've got to rebuild it, I reckon most people would struggle to rebuild for what they've got their properties insured for the moment. And you're out there and you and your crew, not you personally, I can't imagine last time you sort of had a clipboard and walked through a property.
I did on the block recently.
Oh, did you? Oh, that's right. You did the block, didn't you?
Yes. So other than that, it has been a little while.
Other than that, it's been a little while. Now, we'll have a quick chat about that. But, a big part of what depreciation people do is they work out how much stuff costs to build and use. And I've had people come through one of my places recently and, with a fine-tooth comb and pull it to pieces and, which gives you a sense for, the depreciation schedule, but then also what you should be insuring your property for. Most properties probably, the rebuild at the moment would be exorbitant.
Yeah. I think
more than what they're worth, right?
I think the Insurance Council of Australia's, I can't remember right now, I think it's 80% roughly.
Underinsured.
Are underinsured.
Wow.
Now,
Jesus. And most properties you do a QS report on or a depreciation report on, that they be above replacement costs, right? Just the materials in them?
The replacement cost that people are insuring for is definitely just about all of the time below what it should be. Well, Insurance Council says 80% of the time.
80%, yeah.
By the way, the material prices are actually coming down a little bit. Not flowing through to construction just yet, but some of the big builders are seeing the material prices going and should see it flow to maybe some more reasonable. Although usually what happens is that labour increases at the time. I don't think we ever get subtracting construction costs.
No, it just stops going up.
We're just a slowing rate of growth. Yeah. But look, and the insurance issue, a small piece of BMT, we're actually an insurance broker and we provide insurance services. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's a small piece that
for investors.
For investors, landlord and household insurance. And one of the big things the reasons behind that is around the construction cost issue. We've been to the property, we can actually give you the right number, and we do give you the right number to actually insure it for with some faith that it's actually the right number. One of the challenges in that space is that most of the property owners are actually underinsured. The number of times that it becomes a problem is often not that often, but it's getting worse now. We seem to have another flood, another fire every 5 seconds in this country. And there's a big problem with a lack of insurance in that space, a lack of cover. The cost to cover it properly is not that much more, but it is a little bit more, so it's a barrier to do that. And no one thinks it's their house that's going to burn down or get washed away by a flood and have to call an insurance. But it does happen.
Yeah.
And it is a problem for insurance companies. I heard this week one of the major insurers with ads saying, we'll cover you for up to 20% more than you've insured the house for. So obviously they need to charge some premium for that, or they've got to cover that somehow. But it's a ploy to get them to move across their insurance to a different insurance company. And I think, well, so you obviously know it's a problem because you're advertising a way that will deal with this problem, but it's only for a distinct period of time to sign them up to insure them for more than what they're insured for that period of time. What happens after that?
Yeah.
And it's definitely a problem that exists. We've got data that helps to put a proper construction cost on these things, and most of the time it just doesn't get done because the insurance industry at this point doesn't deal with it. Around the Royal Commission, I do know that the next piece for them to look at, the Royal Commissions that have been done, there's another part around the insurance industry, and that construction cost is one that will be, from what I understand from my insurance contacts, a part of that. But definitely a problem that exists.
So you think most investors are questioning, how they can sort of push up yields at the moment, because rents, and we spoke about rents aren't going up as fast as interest rates are going up. So for a lot of people, the gap is growing. I don't know if you're looking at that inside of your portfolio. It's only when it starts hurting that you really start thinking about this sort of stuff. But mortgage costs are ratcheting up right now, and, increasing cash flow is a big focus for a lot of people. A lot of people do renos for the purpose of cash flows, but they probably miss a fair bit in depreciation through that, I would imagine.
So I think yes is the answer. When it starts costing more, and have I looked at mine? Yes, a little bit. I was very lucky for once. I locked a bunch of interest rates in.
What did you lock?
At 2.7% or something a while ago.
Smart.
They're all going to come
off
at some point, and then I'm going to go, it's going to go whack. But it is things you look at. And I think, I think most people are probably a bit slow at raising the rent a lot of the time. And you look at this now, my landlords put the rent up, and they're quite possibly been a bit slack about doing it for a period of time. And now it costs more. Everyone looks at it a bit more, and then they end up putting it up, try to market. It's a high rise because they probably didn't put it up enough before. And so it creates that sort of situation. But look, renovating is definitely a way that you've got the opportunity to increase your value. I've done lots of renovating over years. I've got a couple going on at the moment, actually. There's a piece around the capital value increase, but there's also the rental increase potential. But then the thing that where we're here today, I'm the depreciation guy, that's right.
You are the depreciation guy.
When renovating, thinking about the depreciation properly is another important thing to maximise the cash flow. Before you rip it apart, make sure you've had it assessed. If you haven't, you're throwing away stuff. You're throwing away
money, essentially, aren't you?
Yeah, you're throwing away money. And
if you've chucked it away and no one's assessed it, can you still work it out, or is it
pretty hard?
Lost?
Well, it's pretty hard to justify. We would say make sure it's assessed before you rip it out, because if there's and even with these changes and after these changes, if you bought a property 3 years ago and it's got those changes and all those sorts of things. If someone's put a kitchen in that place 25 years ago and you throw it away now, which is quite possible, to throw away a 25-year-old kitchen, it's part of that structure. It still gets deductions now, but it's still got a chunk of its value left. You throw it away, it's an instant scrapping deduction at the time you throw it away. You might think it's a 25-year-old kitchen and I throw it away and it's not worth much, but you've actually got 15 years of its life left that you would claim depreciation on, or you throw it away, claim it all now, whatever value is left. Now, how do I look at your 25-year-old kitchen when you've already thrown it away? Pretty tough.
It's hard.
Or pretty tough to substantiate it. It'll show good deductions, which is great. I'd love to have a question from the tax office on it and have a photo. I went there this date. I'm a quantity surveyor. There you go. It's 10 grand. Thank you, Mr. Tax Office. That would be the answer I'd like to give in that situation. And the other answer is, well, we guessed based on photos. That's not too much fun.
Yeah, that's good. Well, it's good to have a nice paper trail when it comes to this.
Good paper trail. And then afterwards, when you've spent that money, there's more things you put in there, new stuff you put in there, new plant and equipment, new things you put in. You spend more, you get more depreciation. So you need to make sure you assess it afterwards.
So, Brad, we've got another break. When we come back, I want to just keep picking through this depreciation stuff, because as I mentioned beforehand, I think it's the unloved and forgotten part of property investment. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us.
Want to slash thousands off your home loan repayments? Whether you're an investor or homeowner, we know how important it is to find the lender that suits your unique situation and with the best rate. If you've not compared your home or investment loan in the last 12 months, you may be able to cut your repayments today with a different lender. That could mean more money in your bank account and less stress when it comes to paying your loan. Find out why more borrowers are turning to Finny to refinance their home loans. Call us now on 1300 002 023 and find out what you could save, or visit our website finny.com.au to book an appointment.
Welcome back. Phil Tarrant from Smart Property Investment with Brad Beer, CEO, BMT Tax Depreciation. Now, you're on the block. So, to my point before the break, no one usually cares about depreciation, mate. They roll you out on the block to do a depreciation report. Was that for the benefit of the people that own the properties who were selling them, or was that for the benefit of showing to Aussie consumers and investors how important depreciation schedules are?
They just liked me, Phil. I don't know.
Well, because I watched the final. I didn't watch it through. Were you on the television?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have a clipboard?
Yes, I had a clipboard. We actually use an app, but that looks a bit like I'm playing with Facebook while I'm on TV.
So you went through all 5 properties?
I went through 3 of them, and we did go through all of them. We didn't need to film me going through all of them. But Went through 3 of them, and they did a little session on one of them. And why do they? We've actually done depreciation.
You've done most of them, haven't
estimates on all of them.
Yeah.
Right since the first one in Bondi.
Oh, you've done all of the blocks depreciations.
We did them. We did estimates for how much a buyer of them would get in depreciation. Now these ones, and all of them, they spend so much money. So because they spend usually more than they get for them a lot of the time. The depreciation deductions are huge in comparison to the purchase price because depreciation relates to construction costs and costs, not purchase price. So if it costs more to build than you buy, not great for developer, but these guys are selling TV spots, not developers. Otherwise, they'd be bust by now. The substantial deductions that are there make it look better for an investor that looks to buy it. So we do an estimate of how much deduction might be there. So someone that's looking to buy one of those as investment, well, it's the same guy these days all the time, isn't it? Someone looking to buy them as investment, if they're actually going to crunch some numbers and go, I rent it out for this much and my interest will be this much, they've got an indication of what sort of deductions would be there for depreciation, and they're quite large, so they make the numbers look better. So as far as the show's concerned, they like us to do those numbers because it might attract an investor based on the numbers that may not have come there otherwise.
So the point being is that you could probably make a business out of buying overcooked properties for the purpose of buying the depreciation benefits from it.
Well, there's scenarios.
You know what I mean? Look, because it's 100% legitimate. You're buying essentially the difference between what it's cost to build versus the actual price.
So we did some depreciation schedules as an example on a property once, and I'll give no names or anything, but there was about $20 million spent in construction, commercial property. It had a lot of problems with the building. They couldn't get approval, etc. Developer obviously goes bust. Was sold and someone bought it for $2.5 million. Their depreciation is based on the 20.
Wow. Because
that what was spent in construction to get it where it was. They spent more money. They fixed it up, tried to sell me one of the suites for $2 million later on. But the thing is, it relates to construction, and the block properties, they're not as good as that scenario.
No.
But they do spend often more, so the deductions are high. Now, we don't just buy for depreciation deductions properties. I'm not a believer in that.
No, there is some people though, Brad, and you've seen them beforehand, who when they build new properties, their market material, their headline will be X depreciation benefits. This is a great property. You should buy it for the depreciation.
Yeah, that's as much as I love depreciation, I'm the depreciation guy.
You don't buy for depreciation.
No, I don't buy for depreciation. You should buy for the fundamental reasons you're going to make money out of property for all the ways.
Yeah.
And look, the people that do buy, we've done a fair few schedules for the person that's actually bought the block property afterwards.
Okay.
So then they would be taking advantage of those benefits. But we've done them throughout the time, and some of them get quite good deductions out of those properties and would make the numbers stack better than if they were just buying them because they'd like to get on the auction and look like the important person.
So what do you think of the properties? Were they nice properties?
They always spend so much money, so everything in there is like structurally they, they're not going to – I don't think that the TV show wants a property to have structural or other issues at a later date.
So they're well engineered.
They're well engineered is probably the answer to that. So there's so much money spent there. Does the painting and the finishes as good as, when they're whacking it on and then they're coming in 5 seconds later? You might want to look at some of the final finishes that are done by the contestants that aren't professional painters, I suppose. But otherwise, generally, they're very careful to make sure that they're quality.
Yeah.
They were interesting, these ones. I know they've copped a bit of flack around the big shed on the back of the old house, and it was a bit odd, I'd have to say. But, as far as functionality is concerned, you've got this nice old-style sort of house and, pretty big man sheds. I'm probably biased because the man shed's worth a few more points for me than the aesthetics as a male that loves a toy. So it's a bit out of town if it's the type of thing you want to have, and, it's a beautiful area. But they're a little odd in their setting, I suppose, and that's what some of the feedback is. It's what you like, I suppose.
What you like.
But the type of, I guess, the money spent on them, etc., the quality in that is there as far as anything that really matters point of view. Some of the cookware and things are just ridiculous. The fridge and stove in one of those places, I think, was $80,000. That's a big number.
You've got to use your stove a lot to actually get a did you? You've installed it at your house now.
No, I took a photo.
You come and go, look at this, let's get this.
$80,000 stove,
God.
You could pull off a reasonable reno for $80,000.
You could pull off. I've renovated whole apartments for like 20, back in the day?
I've just done a couple, and another one rolling through at the moment in a little block that I've got. And thinking of examples like that, it's about $30,000 to $35,000 renovation, and because they're a bit dilapidated, and this is another thing on that affordability. I think my rental was $207 a week because it really needed fixing.
Yeah.
And it re-rented at $450. Now that gouging? That's the market change from the. But the thing is, it was questionably livable before, so it needed fixing, but I fixed it properly. Yeah. And then the market said that that's what it was, and then two of them are rented very easily.
So you ratcheted up a notch is what you've done. Yeah, which is cool. Do you reckon depreciation is still a misconstrued term by property investors? Do you reckon actually, and I'm just conscious that we've been chatting about depreciation because I know you're the depreciation guy and I'm a bloke who calls you every now and then saying, quickly, Brad, I need a depreciation excursion because I've forgotten it. So I'm sort of pretty familiar with depreciation, how it works. Do you reckon, like most, and I probably should have done this at the front of the podcast going, what's depreciation, Brad? But I'm just assuming that most people who tune into this podcast, at least, who have been invested in their education around property investment and know how important depreciation is, I'm just assumed that they know that. But maybe I've got that wrong somehow.
Well, and I suppose for those that haven't tuned in too often and it's the first time, we probably should have done some sort of basic stuff.
We probably should have done the basics at the start, but no, I've just assumed.
Yeah, that's all right. So
subject matter knowledge before we've gone into it.
And it's always a risk when you do know about it. You think, doesn't everybody know? Well, no, you do because you do it every day.
I've deliberately done this right at the end because I wanted people to be sitting there going, what is it? 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 The mystery of depreciation.
Look, very, very simply, depreciation – we all understand pretty well if we talk about a car, I suppose. And if you take that concept and go, well, I buy my car, I drive it out of the shop and suddenly it depreciates in value. We all get that, right? If you use that car for business, you get to claim against that depreciation against the income. A property, which is a slight twist on that, we buy property so that it appreciates in value. That's the whole thing, the capital growth. We want to make money from that. But the carpet wears out, the stove wears out, the things wear out and they become worth less value. And the tax office allows us as property investors, because we're using those basically for business, that the decline in value of the items, and that's everything from the carpet to the bricks and mortar in a different way, we get to claim a deduction against the decline in value of those things each year. I go in, we estimate the cost of that building. We put values on the things that we can claim, and we talked about changes, so some you can't, all that sort of stuff. We go and find what is claimable. We put a cost on that, and we come up with a number that goes into your tax return as a non-cash tax deduction. You know, we work alongside accountants. We come up with one of those numbers for the tax return. That's the depreciation number. We work out that number and we project that out each year. You make a deduction for that. It's a non-cash tax deduction. So we pay our interest. We make a deduction for our losses there. That's great, but you paid for it. Depreciation is the items getting older and wearing out. You don't actually pay for it. You make a deduction. And the average out of last year's reports in the first year was about just under $10,000.
Okay.
So it's a fair deduction. You know, we're mucking around trying to get 2% off our management fees and blah, blah, blah. And like we said earlier, 70% of people are not doing this properly and they're just leaving the money at the tax office. Yeah. And the average deduction the first year is nearly $10,000 by getting these reports done properly. And that's old and new and everything in the whole year.
As I'm chatting to you, I'm sort of sitting there thinking, I was just thinking through all the missed opportunities I have inside of my portfolio around depreciations right now. So
happens every time we come and have this discussion, Phil.
I know, and I'm going to do something about it because it's and it probably resonates with a lot of our listeners. They're probably sitting going, I haven't done that for years. But you can actually go back a financial year, 2 financial years.
Yeah. What's one great thing, you know, if you don't pay your tax, the tax office will make you pay it, fine you, etc.
Pay your tax. It's important.
But if you don't claim deductions, depreciation or otherwise, that you should have, you can fairly easily go back and amend up to 2 tax returns. So, I mean, the important question then is don't do another one because you miss another year. But if you go back and amend your 2 years of returns, you look at what it was, and even if you're claiming something, if you're claiming $4,000 and it can be $10,000, you'll go and make another $6,000 deduction last year. The tax office will give you a check back for 2 years pretty easily. So doing that and to start with, if you're not sure, there's a calculator on the website that you can go and play with and put your property details in there and it'll spit you out what it roughly should be. Or email us the address and we'll have a look at it and say, we think you should be getting 10 grand. What are you claiming? 3? Okay. Maybe we should have a discussion about doing depreciation.
So and we're both friends of our accountant. I think we might have the same accountant, or we at least know a lot of similar accountants, and we love accountants either way.
Oh, absolutely.
If your accountant says, don't worry about it, Phil, I'll do your depreciation schedule for you, should you go, I'd actually like to get a company to do it, because to your point, if you're only getting 3,000, it should be 10,000. Your accountant might not know.
Yeah, and I know your accountant as well. And,
yes,
and
you know my accountant well.
I know him well,
yeah.
And he is very good at property, and we have lots of discussion about property.
He tells me to use you.
But he gets a depreciation schedule done by us.
Yeah.
He'll tell you and his clients to do that. And the reason behind that is firstly, well, there's a couple of reasons. There's a compliance reason. The depreciation relates to the construction cost. And with all due respect to accountants, they know how to do your accounts, but they don't know how to count bricks like the quantity surveyor, which is what we are.
Yeah.
Counting bricks and coming up with construction costs is what our expertise actually does. Tax office will accept our numbers for that because that's what we know how to do. I'm not a tax expert. Well, I've got a tax practitioners board tax agent's number.
Oh, do you?
For the purpose of doing depreciation schedules. So we had to tick that hoop to say we know something about that.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to do all your accounts. I don't really want to, especially yours, Phil.
Easy.
I don't think I want to do mine either, just quietly. But they, when someone thinks when their accountant says they've looked after it, either yours looks after it by making sure they get it done properly.
Yeah.
But if they're guessing or they're coming up with a number without the compliance piece around construction costs, you're at risk. Or you're just missing out on money, one or the other.
Yeah, I would say it's the accountant's responsibility to ensure that as an investor you get a depreciation schedule.
And that's the difference is I've got an accountant that looks after my staff. Well, I've got an accountant that makes sure my stuff is looked after by giving me the right people is the right answer to that. But as soon as you start talking about tax, people think, oh, my accountant, God looks after all that.
Yeah.
And the answer is that the right accountants should have the right special. Even in accounting spaces, I have different accountants actually that do different parts of my life for different things.
I'm the same.
And I figured you would be exactly the same. Yeah. They're not the company accountant's not the accountant that does my personal tax returns. Different people, different skill set, and they bring in the appropriate professionals in the accounting industry to do that. We're attached as far as let's go get the most out of depreciation and make sure it's taxed. We go to the house. The accountant doesn't go to the house. We go to the house and we count the stuff and we have a look at it. We take photos to estimate.
I know depreciation schedule is a tax deduction. But how much? I can't remember how much they are. Do I know? It depend?
It depends somewhat. Generally, it's $700 plus GST for a normal residential house or unit, unless you've got a $10 million house or something, which there's not so many of those.
There's not many of them
for
around.
investment.
No.
Usually people live in those ones.
Yeah, typically.
So it's got heaps of work in it like that. Otherwise, traditionally, or mostly, we're within the market of those things if it's done properly at $700 plus GST.
And you do it once, right? And then
deductible as well.
And it's deductible, yeah. And so you do it once and then it gives you a schedule for how long?
If it's a new property, you've got 40 years of claims and you never have to come and see me again, Phil.
So it's a one-off thing that says, Phil, here's how you deduct this if you hold this for the next 40 years. It'll be itemised and then your accountant just plugs that number in every year.
Plugs a number each year. The only time the thing that you do need to do is if you change what's there, do a renovation, then
you got to redo it.
You need to you just update it.
Okay.
But with that scrapping thing, if we've done the schedule at the start, you don't have to come and see me again before you rip it apart because you've already got the schedule in place.
Yes. Yeah. And I
as
remember because you guys did the schedule on a reno we did years ago. A whole apartment that we ripped out and did. So you guys, and I was like, "What's this scrapping thing?" And I was like, "Well, that's cool,"
Because it means
a scrap, right?
Yeah, it's a scrap. Scrapping's not the real term. We kind of made that one up.
Yeah.
I think. Well, make sure you take advantage of writing off the residual value items when you throw them away, Phil, versus scrap it, claim it.
Claim it. It's a bit colloquial, but anyway, very informative. It's been too long, mate, since we've had you on the show. So let's get you back in. And there's some other cool stuff happening as well that you'll see Brad connected with over time. Go and check these guys out. What's your email address?
Website. bmtqs.com.au.
QS being
quantity surveyor,
bmtqs.com. You got a calculator there, right?
There's a calculator there for depreciation you can use. That it's free and you can just put your property in.
If you haven't done a depreciation schedule for any of your properties, or this is a new concept for you as a property investor, jump on there, plug it in, see what happens. Guess what? I reckon you'll be on the phone pretty quickly. Anyway, Brad, thanks for your time, mate.
Phil, always a pleasure.
That's cool. I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. Quite a long chat, but it's good to get into some of the nitty-gritty of property investing. Sometimes gets glazed over by a lot of people, but this is where the rubber hits the road when it comes to maximising your investment properties. You might buy well, but if you don't manage well, you're going to find yourself not extracting the value that you can out of property investment. And it comes back to the idea is that you're buying property because you want it to go up in value and you want to be able to hold it with as minimum amount of costs or positively over time. And tax depreciation is absolutely one way that can help you do that. We'll see you again next time. Until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Have you signed up to HR Leader? Go to hrleader.com.au to subscribe. Receive the latest HR and people leadership insights and news.